And now a story of an attack on something so American, you could almost put it in the same category as baseball and apple pie. I'm talking about rock and roll, and more specifically, one of the most well-known instruments that has helped create and keep rock and roll alive, not to mention jazz and country music as well, for decades. I'm talking about the Gibson guitar. Well, apparently, federal agents in this country are taking issue with the 100-year-old company. Last week, the Gibson guitar factories in Memphis and Nashville, Tennessee were raided. Some of the workers even told they could face prison time. It was the second raid at the Gibson factories in 2 years. This time, agents confiscated wood imported from India that was apparently in violation of Indian export law. Let me say that again. The U.S. government issued warrants based on its interpretation of another country's law. Now, there is a law in this country called the Lacey Act. It requires companies to make detailed disclosures about wood imports and also bars the purchase of goods exported in violation of a foreign country's laws. There are still lots of questions about whether or not Gibson violated that at all. But let's get to the bigger picture here and look at whether or not raids like this are part of a bigger trend in this country. I know one man who says yes. Earlier, I spoke with radio host Alex Jones. He's in Austin, Texas, another music capital of this country. Never at a loss for words, I asked him to elaborate on his recent comments comparing this incident to a Gestapo-style attack on U.S. industry.
Well, it's not an isolated incident. That's why for decades we've had tax incentives to move out of the country. That's why the president and others want to put carbon taxes on U.S. industry, but it won't be on Chinese, Indian, Mexican, or 100+ other third world countries. Also, this was a non-union shop, and the CEO, who I've interviewed several times now, Mr. Juskowitz, is a Republican donor, and so this was clearly politically targeted. Just like General Electric sits at the head of the president's economic council, their coal-powered plants are exempt from the new carbon rules, but all the other companies aren't. Or if you're on the inside with the government, you're exempt from having to buy health care for your employees, but everybody else has to get it. So it's about unfair trade advantages. And now I just talked to the CEO again today, and I just aired it on my own radio show, and they now have gotten the document and are about to put it out today or tomorrow. And this is big news breaking here on television, that in federal court, the feds have told them, leave the United States, go to Madagascar. We don't want industry here. And we've heard about a post-industrial America. This is about shutting down all companies that are not globalist Fortune 100.
But what, Alex, I mean, what would the benefit be for this president, for this administration, for lawmakers to encourage companies to make it so jobs go elsewhere? I mean, clearly this is the #1 thing every single lawmaker here in Washington says is at the top of their agenda, creating jobs. I know that Gibson has actually created more jobs in the last few years instead of cutting them. So what would be the benefit for President Obama, for any of these people who you were blaming in this incident, to send jobs elsewhere?
Well, John D. Rockefeller, the founder of the dynasty, who was a big robber baron and openly for consolidating power and having monopolies, he said competition is a sin. And Gibson has now become the leader in American-made guitars. 60% of their sales are overseas. They were exploding and annihilating the market share of two big Democratic Party donors. And so it shows that more than ever, the White House is basically passing out favors. Here's an example that came out in the news 2 years ago. And again, I'm nonpartisan. Republicans do things like this when they're in power as well. But remember when the government took over General Motors and then openly announced, we don't care if you have an 85-year franchise of General Motors. If you're not a donor to us, we're taking your franchise away and giving it to someone else. So you still have your car dealership, you just can't sell Chevys. That came out. So big mega business in all of history has always been about coming in and saying, we're going to let you operate, but you can't operate. This is pure fascism, corporate fascism, and you can't argue with the fact that they've had 2 raids and wouldn't tell them what this whole thing was about. And now they admit, oh, you worked the wood from India, even though India says it's legal and the wood is not endangered. You did the manufacturing, the value added here in the U.S., so we say that's illegal, even though India says that's not what their law says. So this is all about global governance, global corporate enforcement of rules selectively enforced to shut down insiders' competition. This is what the oligarchs did in Russia 15, 20 years ago. This is what the British did that started the war 235 years ago in the U.S., 1776. This is the same system over and over again, where insiders use government control to shut down their competition. It is as old as humanity and civilization itself.
It's really interesting, though. I mean, it seems to me, Alex, that you're asserting that this was, you know, kind of an inside political job, giving favors to friends and whatnot. I haven't seen any concrete evidence for this, but regardless of that, I want to make this a little bigger. I mean, when I saw this story, it sort of reminded me, we've been doing a lot of stories, and I think you have too, of some of these, you know, lemonade stands run by kids that are being, you know, taken down by police, or some of these other things. People in California who want to sell vegetables on their front lawn, or the Amish people who want to sell their neighbors raw milk. I mean, this is a larger trend. Talk a little bit about that.
No, it is. Sure. I mean, look, it's a fact that General Electric's exempt from the regulations they wrote and had Obama put in. So, I mean, that's why we know what's happening here with Gibson. They told him, I know it's unbelievable, get out of America. Okay, everything they've done, tax incentives to move to China, has been to deindustrialize. And now, this has been going on for years, SWAT teaming Amish, arresting people at lemonade stands, going after people growing gardens, 93 days in jail they face, arresting people and charging them with life in prison in Illinois for videotaping police in public. The bureaucracy knows that the foreign banks have conquered the U.S. They've imploded the economy by design. They know that the people are on the edge of revolution, so they're trying to break our will, dominate us, and exercise power over us to get us just to accept tyranny. It's really happening. It's happened in every other culture. Why does anybody think it can't happen in America? And as far as Obama goes, he's a teleprompter reading puppet. It's the military-industrial complex owned by big mega banks that is trying to break the will of the American people and the rest of the world, for that matter.
And just regarding this specific case, Alex, this Gibson guitar case, it's really interesting because from what I understand, the wood that was imported here, it would have been fine if it would have been finished in India, but it wasn't finished in India. It was finished here by American workers. So there's a lot of things. As far as I know, charges haven't been filed yet. I know some people worried that this is just the government sort of bullying the company. Have you heard this?
Well, they've threatened some of them with jail time. They've pulled employees, according to the CEO, in and basically threatened them to make stuff up or they'll go to jail. They're going after janitors. They're going after people that actually carve the wood. And yes, they're now finally, after 3 years of investigation, they first raided them in 2009, so 2.5 years ago. They're now telling them it's that you work the wood. They have all the paperwork, and the Indian government has said, no, we did take the trees. They were value added. Our law says they've got to be value added, not finished. But the way our government's interpreting is they'd have to send the whole guitar part totally carved to spec, and American workers can't touch it. Since when? I mean, China doesn't have these restrictions on their people. Again, everything is about assaulting. Look, they're going after people that have garage sales now and trying to arrest them.
And
you
Alex,
can't fly American flags.